the fence that fought back. It wasn't the usual symphony of dawn that woke Ethan Carter that crisp March morning in 2025. No chirping birds or the soft hum of his solar panels drinking in the first rays of sunlight greeted him. Instead, it was a scream, a high-pitched, rage-filled shriek that jolted him out of bed like a fire alarm. His heart thudded against his ribcage as he fumbled for his robe, the worn cotton slipping over his shoulders as he stumbled toward the window. Peering through the blinds, he froze. His solar panels, his pride and joy, a gleaming testament to his eco-conscious lifestyle, were gone. The roof, once adorned with sleek black rectangles, was now a barren wasteland of exposed wires and jagged mounting brackets. A sickening knot twisted in his stomach. Ethan bolted outside, bare feet slapping against the cool wooden porch, and stopped dead in his tracks. There, in the middle of his meticulously trimmed lawn, stood Vanessa Hargrove, the neighborhood's self-appointed dictator and president of the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association. Her arms were crossed, her lips curled into a smirk so smug it could have curdled milk. She wore a pastel blazer that screamed, "I'm in charge," and her over-bleached bob gleamed unnaturally in the sunlight. "Morning, Ethan," she chirped, her voice laced with mock sweetness. "You weren't in compliance, so I took care of it." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Took care of it," he echoed, his voice low and trembling with disbelief. He gestured toward the empty roof. "You mean you stole my solar panels?" Vanessa sighed theatrically, as if dealing with a petulant child. "Confiscated, Ethan. There's a difference. You were warned, multiple times, I might add, about the violation. Those panels were an eyesore, and the board agreed they didn't fit Pinewood's aesthetic." His blood pressure spiked so fast he swore he could hear his veins popping. "An eyesore? They were state-of-the-art, Vanessa. Installed within every guideline you people threw at me. I've got the permits to prove it." She waved a dismissive hand, her manicured nails glinting like tiny daggers. "Oh, Ethan, permits don't change the fact that they clashed with the community vision. They've been repurposed now, much better use of them, don't you think?" She gestured vaguely toward the Pinewood Clubhouse, a squat building at the end of the cul-de-sac. "Repurposed?" Ethan's voice cracked. "You took thousands of dollars worth of my property, and what? Slapped them on the clubhouse." Vanessa's smirk faltered for a split second, but she recovered with a tilt of her head. "I'm the HOA, Ethan. We make the rules. And trust me, this was for the greater good." He took a step closer, fists clenched so tight his knuckles whitened. "This is theft. I've got security footage. You had no right." "Please," she cut him off, her tone dripping with condescension. "Spare me the dramatics. If you've got a problem, take it up with the board. Oh, and while you're at it," she turned, flipping her hair with a flourish as she strutted toward her golf cart. "That ridiculous electric fence of yours? It's against code. Take it down." Ethan watched, pulse roaring in his ears, as she climbed into the cart, the same one he'd seen on his security feed the night before, hauling away his panels like a suburban pirate. She drove off, leaving him standing in his yard, surrounded by whispering neighbors who'd gathered to watch the spectacle. Their eyes flickered with concern, but something else lingered there too, fear. Vanessa had ruled Pinewood Estates with an iron fist for years, and no one dared cross her. Not after she'd find the Millers into bankruptcy over an unapproved mailbox or force the Wilsons to repaint their house 3 times for non-compliant shades of beige. But Ethan wasn't the Millers or the Wilsons. As he stared at the empty roof, a fire ignited in his chest. This wasn't just about solar panels anymore. This was war. Back inside, Ethan paced his living room like a caged animal, replaying the security footage on his laptop. There she was, Vanessa, directing 2 HOA lackeys as they dismantled his panels under the cover of night. Their flashlights bobbed like fireflies, illuminating her smug face as she barked orders. Every frame fueled his rage hotter, until he could practically feel steam rising from his skin. He could go the legal route, file a complaint, sue the HOA, demand his panels back. But he knew how that would end. Vanessa had the board in her pocket, a loyal posse of yes-men who'd rubber stamp any fine or penalty she conjured up. The bylaws were her playground, a labyrinth of fine print no one bothered to read until it was too late. No, if he wanted justice, he'd have to fight fire with fire, or In this case, electricity with electricity. That's when the idea hit him. It started as a flicker, a mischievous spark, then blazed into a full-blown plan so diabolically brilliant he couldn't help but grin. Vanessa wanted to play dirty? Fine. Let's see how she liked a taste of her own medicine. Ethan grabbed his toolbox and marched to the garage, where a spare set of solar panels sat, still in their boxes from a bulk order he'd snagged on sale. These weren't going on the roof this time. Oh no, they were going on the electric fence, the very one Vanessa had been hounding him to remove for months. If she thought she could waltz onto his property and steal from him without consequences, she was about to get the shock of her life. He spent the afternoon wiring the panels into the fence, a 6-foot chain-link monstrosity he'd installed years ago to keep deer out of his garden. The setup was simple but genius. The panels would power a low-voltage system, delivering a harmless but humiliating zap to anyone who touched it. Just enough to send a message. By sunset, his masterpiece was complete. The fence gleamed in the golden light, a silent sentinel guarding his domain. Ethan sank into a lawn chair on his porch, cracked open a beer, and waited. He knew Vanessa wouldn't resist the bait. Sleep eluded him that night, not out of nerves, but excitement. The kind that bubbles in your chest when you know you're about to witness karma in its purest form. He double-checked every connection, tested the voltage with a multimeter, even practiced his innocent, "Oh, didn't I mention?" line in the mirror. Vanessa was a creature of habit, and he'd bet his last dollar she'd be back by noon, ready to confiscate his non-compliant panels again. The next morning, Ethan played the part of the oblivious homeowner. He mowed the lawn, watered his azaleas, even waved cheerfully at the neighbors peering from their windows. The Pinewood rumor mill had been churning over time. Everyone knew about Vanessa's theft, but no one dared take his side publicly. Fear of her wrath kept them silent, as always. Then, right on cue, she arrived. The golf cart screeched to a halt at the edge of his yard around noon, Vanessa stepping out in oversized sunglasses and a strut that oozed self-importance. Behind her trailed two of her minions, Greg, a wiry guy with a permanent frown, and Cheryl, a mousy woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Ethan," Vanessa announced, her voice loud enough to wake the dead. "I warned you. And yet here we are again. More solar panels, more violations. You never learn, do you?" He turned off the hose, wiping his hands on his jeans with a puzzled frown. "Violations? I don't recall breaking any rules." She sighed, long and exaggerated. "The HOA has strict policies about aesthetic harmony, Ethan. Your little science project here? It's an eyesore. I gave you a chance to comply, but since you refuse, I'll have to remove them again." "You mean steal them again?" he shot back, raising an eyebrow. Greg and Cheryl exchanged nervous glances, but Vanessa didn't flinch. "Confiscate," she corrected, her smirk widening. "And since you're clearly incapable of learning, I'll be adding a fine this time. A substantial one." Ethan crossed his arms, fighting the grin tugging at his lips. "Let me get this straight. You're planning to break onto my property again and take what's mine?" Vanessa's smile tightened. "It's about community standards, Ethan. As HOA president, it's my duty to enforce them. Now, are you going to take them down, or do we have to do it for you?" He shrugged, stepping aside with a casual wave toward the fence. "Go ahead." Her smile widened, predatory and triumphant. She turned to her minions. "Well, get to work." Greg hesitated, scratching his neck. Vanessa, are we sure about this? Last time, people were kinda upset." "Stop being dramatic, Greg," she snapped, jabbing a finger toward the fence. "It's just solar panels. Do you want your HOA privileges revoked?" Greg swallowed hard and stepped forward, reaching for the first panel. The moment his fingers brushed the frame, a crackling jolt surged through him. His body seized, a shout erupting as he stumbled backward, hair standing on end like a cartoon character. Cheryl, instinctively reaching to steady him, got zapped too, yelping as she flailed and landed flat on her backside. Vanessa stood between them, gaping in bewilderment. "What the—" Before she could finish, she lunged for the fence herself. The zap was glorious. She screamed, a full-on, horror movie wail that sent birds scattering from the trees. Her body convulsed, and in her panic, she tripped over a flower pot and face-planted into Ethan's azalea bush. Silence fell for a blissful moment. Then, a snicker from a neighbor's porch. Another laugh. A whistle of approval. The crowd that had gathered, drawn by the commotion, erupted into hysterics. Vanessa scrambled to her feet, red-faced and disheveled, yanking leaves from her hair. "What just happened?" she shrieked. Ethan leaned against the fence, suppressing a grin. "Oh, didn't I mention? I wired the panels to my electric fence. Gotta protect my property, you know." Her jaw dropped. You can't do that." "Sure I can," he said with a shrug. "The fence is legal, and the panels are mine. Just keeping things secure." Greg, still dazed, muttered, "I think my soul left my body." Cheryl rubbed her arm. "I can still feel my teeth vibrating." Vanessa, however, wasn't laughing. Her face twisted with rage. "You think this is funny? You think you've won?" Ethan nodded, calm as ever. "Oh, I know I have." Ethan Carter stood on his porch, beer in hand, watching the last echoes of Vanessa Hargrove's golf cart fade into the distance. The neighborhood buzzed like a beehive kicked over, neighbors whispering behind curtains, phones lighting up with group chats, and a few brave souls still chuckling openly from their driveways. The azalea bush, now sporting a Vanessa-shaped dent, swayed gently in the breeze, a silent trophy of his victory. For the first time all day, Ethan felt the knot in his chest loosen. But he knew this wasn't over. Vanessa wasn't the type to slink away quietly, tail between her legs. No, she'd come back swinging. Harder, meaner, and with every ounce of HOA authority she could muster. By dusk, the fallout had already begun. His phone pinged with a notification from the Pinewood Estates Facebook group, a shaky video of Vanessa's electrifying tumble, uploaded by Mrs. Jenkins across the street. The caption read, "HOA President versus Ethan's fence, round 1 inch," followed by a string of laughing emojis. Comments poured in. "About time someone stood up to her. Did you see her hair after that zap? I need popcorn for this." Ethan scrolled through, a grin tugging at his lips. The video had 87 likes in under an hour. By morning, it'd be viral. He barely slept that night, not from worry but from the adrenaline still coursing through him. Every creak of the house made him imagine Vanessa creeping back with bolt cutters and a vengeance. At 3 a.m., he found himself re-watching the security footage, not the theft this time, but the zap. The way her sunglasses flew off mid-scream, the flailing arms, the glorious thud into the bush, it was a masterpiece. He saved a backup to his cloud drive, just in case. Sure enough, dawn brought her retaliation. Ethan shuffled outside in his slippers to grab the paper and found a neon yellow violation notice duct-taped to his front door, flapping dramatically in the wind like a battle flag. He ripped it off, scanning the text. Pinewood Estates HOA violation notice, illegal electric fencing. Dangerous and non-compliant with community safety standards. Immediate removal required. Failure to comply will result in fines and/or legal action. Issued March 10, 2025. Signed, Vanessa Hargrove, President. He laughed so hard he nearly dropped his coffee. Illegal electric fencing? The same fence that had been standing for 3 years without a peep from her? The same one she'd ignored until it dared to bite back? Oh, this was rich. Vanessa wasn't just mad. She was desperate. This wasn't a notice. It was a declaration of war. Ethan didn't crumple it up or toss it aside. No, he saw an opportunity. If Vanessa wanted to escalate, he'd escalate right back, publicly. He grabbed his phone and drafted an email to the Pinewood HOA listserv, fingers flying over the keys with glee. Dear neighbors, in response to Vanessa's recent concerns about community safety, I'll be hosting a live demonstration of my fence's dangerous electric capabilities this afternoon. Since she's convinced it's a hazard, I invite anyone who feels at risk to come see for themselves. Bring your questions and your sense of humor. Refreshments provided. 5 p.m. at 1427 Maple Lane. See you there? Ethan Carter. He hit send, picturing Vanessa's face when she read it. The rumor mill would do the rest. By noon, the neighborhood was abuzz again. Texts flying, kids biking past his house to gawk at the fence, even old Mr. Thompson from 2 streets over calling to ask if he could bring his dog. Ethan spent the day prepping, setting out folding chairs he borrowed from the garage, filling a cooler with soda and beer, and rigging a Bluetooth speaker to play some light tunes. If this was going to be a showdown, he'd make it a party. By 4:30 People started trickling in. First came the Hendersons from next door, hauling lawn chairs and a bag of chips. Then Mike Russo, a burly guy who'd once clashed with Vanessa over a backyard grill, arrived with a six-pack and a grin. "Heard you gave her a jolt," he said, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "Most satisfying thing I've heard all year." Soon, a good 30 neighbors had gathered, some perched on porches across the street, others milling around his yard with plastic cups in hand. The air hummed with anticipation. At 5 o'clock sharp, Vanessa rolled up in her golf cart, flanked by two board members, Richard Platt, a balding accountant with a perpetual frown, and Susan Kim, a quiet woman who rarely spoke up. Vanessa stepped out, arms crossed, her pastel blazer swapped for a stern gray one that screamed, "I mean business." Her hair was still a little frizzy from the zap, though she'd clearly tried to tame it. "Ethan," she barked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This little stunt changes nothing. That fence is a danger to the community, and I'll see it torn down if it's the last thing I do." He leaned against his porch railing, sipping a soda. "Good to see you too, Vanessa. Glad you could make it." The crowd tittered. Her nostrils flared, but she pressed on, holding up a copy of the violation notice like a prosecutor waving evidence. "This isn't a game. You've endangered us all with your reckless modifications. I've already contacted the authorities." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Authorities? For a fence that's been here since before you moved in? Tell you what, let's settle this now." He turned to the crowd, raising his voice. "Folks, Vanessa here thinks my fence is a death trap. So let's test it. Anyone want to see how dangerous it really is?" A murmur rippled through the group. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "I'm not touching that thing again," she snapped. "It's a liability." "Then I'll do it," Ethan said, stepping forward. Before she could object, he strode to the fence and slapped his hand against it. Palm flat, fingers splayed. Nothing. No shock, no jolt, just a faint tingle he'd calibrated to be barely noticeable. He held it there, grinning at the crowd. "See? Harmless. Low voltage, solar-powered, and perfectly legal." The neighbors erupted, some laughing, some clapping, a few muttering in disbelief. Mike stepped forward, squinting at the fence. "Wait, so this is what you called the cops over, Vanessa? This?" Her face flushed beet red. "That's not the point. It's the principle. It's an eyesore, a safety hazard." "It looks like a normal fence to me," Mike cut in, crossing his arms. Another neighbor, Mrs. Patel from down the street, piped up. "Didn't you steal his solar panels, Vanessa?" The air shifted. Ethan seized the moment, folding his arms casually. "Great question." Vanessa never did explain why she thought it was okay to rip thousands of dollars worth of my property off my roof. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of agreement and outrage. Vanessa froze, her composure cracking. "It was an HOA decision," she sputtered. "For the community." Ethan tilted his head. "So where are my panels now, Vanessa? Because they're sure as hell not on my roof." The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade, and for the first time, Vanessa faltered. Her eyes darted to Richard and Susan, seeking backup, but they shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. The crowd leaned in, sensing blood in the water. Ethan pressed his advantage, stepping closer to the fence and gesturing toward it with mock curiosity. "Come on, Vanessa. You said they were repurposed for the community. Where'd they go? The clubhouse? The pool? Or maybe your backyard?" A few neighbors snickered. Vanessa's lips tightened into a trembling line. "This isn't about the panels anymore," she snapped. "This is about your blatant disregard for HOA rules." "Then let's talk about the rules," Ethan interrupted, his voice steady but sharp. "Because last I checked, theft isn't in the bylaws. Neither is trespassing. But you and your crew waltzed onto my property, dismantled my panels, and hauled them off in that golf cart of yours." He pointed to the cart parked behind her. "I've got it all on video. Want me to play it for everyone?" The crowd buzzed, some pulling out phones like they were ready to record the sequel. Vanessa's face paled, but she rallied, jabbing a finger at him. "You're twisting this." The board approved the removal. "Did they?" Ethan cut in, turning to Richard and Susan. "Care to weigh in, folks? Did the board sign off on stealing my property?" Richard cleared his throat, running a hand over his balding scalp. "Well, it's complicated." "Complicated," Mike Russo boomed, stepping forward. "Sounds like a yes or no to me." Susan shifted her weight, staring at her shoes. We didn't exactly vote on it, she mumbled. Vanessa said it was urgent, that it had to be done right away. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Ethan raised an eyebrow. No vote. So Vanessa acted alone. Richard sighed, looking genuinely pained. Look, after last night's incident, some of us started digging into things. The panels weren't repurposed for the community, like she said. Vanessa whipped her head toward him so fast her neck cracked. What? Richard ignored her, addressing the crowd. We traced the money. The panels were sold to a private buyer. And the funds, he hesitated, then dropped the bomb. They went into Vanessa's personal account. The yard went silent, save for the faint hum of the fence. Then chaos erupted. She sold them. Mrs. Patel cried. What the hell? Mike shouted. Someone in the back muttered. Oh, hell no. Vanessa's eyes widened, her breathing shallow. That's ridiculous. I was reimbursing myself for HOA-related expenses. Reimbursing yourself? Richard cut her off, his voice hard. For what? A spa membership? A Peloton? A $500 steakhouse bill? We've got the receipts, Vanessa. You embezzled HOA funds. The crowd roared, anger, disbelief, and a few cheers mixing into a cacophony. Vanessa stumbled back, clutching the violation notice like a lifeline. This is a setup. Ethan put you up to this. Ethan laughed, genuine and loud. I didn't have to. You did this to yourself. Richard held up a hand, silencing the crowd. We're calling an emergency vote tonight to remove Vanessa as president. Effective immediately. A roar of approval erupted, clapping, whistles, even a good riddance from Mr. Thompson's porch. Vanessa's face contorted with fury, her eyes locking onto Ethan. This is your fault, she hissed, voice trembling with rage. You think you've won? You've ruined everything. He met her glare with a calm, satisfied smile. No, Vanessa. This is karma. That was the breaking point. With a wordless scream, half frustration, half defeat, she spun on her heel, stomped to her golf cart, and revved the engine like she was auditioning for a drag race. Greg and Cheryl, still shell-shocked from their zaps, scrambled after her, piling in as she peeled out, leaving tire marks on the pavement and a cloud of dust in her wake. Ethan turned back to the crowd, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Well, he said, raising his soda, that was fun. Who wants a beer? Laughter broke out, and the tension shattered like glass. Neighbors swarmed him, Mike slapping his back, Mrs. Patel shaking his hand, kids running around the yard like it was a festival. The demonstration had turned into a celebration, and Ethan was the reluctant hero at its center. The HOA board didn't waste time. By 8 o'clock that night, an email hit every Pinewood inbox. Emergency meeting results. Vanessa Hargrove removed as HOA president, effective immediately. Investigation into financial misconduct ongoing. Interim leadership to be appointed by week's end. Attached was a grainy photo of Vanessa's golf cart speeding away, captioned with a single word, but bye. Ethan read it from his couch, feet propped on the coffee table, a half-eaten pizza slice in hand. The neighborhood group chat exploded, gifs of dancing cats, memes of Vanessa tumbling into the bush, and a flood of finally messages. Someone even started a poll. What's Vanessa's next move? A. Move away. B. Sue everyone. C. Pretend this never happened. Option A was winning by a landslide. The next morning, Ethan woke to silence. No screams, no golf carts, just the soft chirp of birds and the hum of his fence. He stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, and took a deep breath. The air tasted sweeter, the sun brighter. Vanessa was gone. Not just figuratively. Her car was missing from her driveway, curtains drawn, garage door shut. Word spread fast. She'd packed up overnight and bolted, leaving behind a reign of terror that had terrorized Pinewood for years. By noon, Richard and Susan showed up at his door, looking sheepish. We, found your panels, Richard said, scratching his neck. She'd stashed them in a storage unit downtown. We'll have them reinstalled by tomorrow, no charge. Ethan nodded, keeping his tone neutral. And the money she took? Susan sighed. We're filing a claim with the bank. She drained the HOA account pretty bad, over $10,000 gone. But we'll recover what we can. Good, Ethan said, then added with a smirk, Tell the new president to keep an eye on the fine print." They left, and Ethan spent the afternoon tinkering with his fence, tweaking the voltage just for fun. Neighbors stopped by, some to thank him, others to gawk at the now infamous setup. Mike Russo handed him a cold beer as the sun dipped low. "That was the most satisfying thing I've ever seen," he said, clinking bottles. To Vanessa free living. The street erupted in cheers, kids, parents, even old Mr. Thompson raising his cane from his porch. Ethan grinned, tipping his beer back. Peace was restored, one zap at a time. Weeks later, Pinewood Estates felt like a different place. The HOA, under new leadership, a quiet guy named Tom who actually listened, voted to loosen the bylaws. No more fines for unapproved flower pots or non-compliant paint shades. Ethan's solar panels were back on his roof, humming away, and his fence stood tall, a quiet legend in its own right. He sat on his porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky orange, a beer in hand, and a contented sigh on his lips. Mrs. Patel waved from her yard, planting marigolds without a care. Mike fired up his grill, the smell of burgers wafting over. Kids biked past, laughing, free from Vanessa's watchful glare. Ethan thought back to that first scream, the one that had started it all. He'd lost his panels, his patience, and nearly his sanity, but he'd gained something better, a neighborhood that fought back. Vanessa had underestimated him, and in doing so, she'd lost everything. He raised his bottle to the fence, its panels glinting in the fading light. "To you," he murmured. "The real MVP." And somewhere, in a distant town where Vanessa was likely terrorizing a new HOA, a golf cart sputtered. But here, in Pinewood, all was well.